Just want to remind you guys, this episode is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, we are back. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Guys, you've probably read the article by now or seen it on social media. Want to bring on somebody who has covered the Colts for a long time, has been in that locker room, and had a part in that story. Of course, I'm talking about Zak Keefer himself. Zach, hope you had a great holiday season, man. Happy New Year to you, and potentially a lot of new things happening here for the Colts coming up. How are you doing?
I'm good, Cody. Happy New Year to you as well. Sorry to be coming on in this kind of situation. I was talking to my wife the other day. I'm kind of getting tired of writing these types of stories, but this is the situation with this team. Feels like we're just watching a team that's stuck in the mud, that's just spinning its tires, that's going nowhere. And even though I've left the beat for 2 years, it feels like some of the same problems that were there when I left in 2022 have still continued, which is really disappointing.
Yeah, I was going to say it probably feels like Groundhog Day again, right? From 2022. It's just the same stuff, different
This is
day.
not as bad as that. I don't think anything was as bad as that.
Right. Absolutely. But, now it's led Zach to a lot of speculation on some different, individuals within the Colts organization that have been there for a long time. And I know, obviously, you wrote, the article, and there was a couple snippets I want to kind of highlight. And if there's anything else you want to touch on in there. But I think the first thing is probably the comment by that veteran Colts player about the fact this team has no direction. There's really from the top down, essentially, right? Still losing. And you compare it to the other, different teams, some of the elite in the NFL, and you compare, and it's not even close. And so, what were some of the thoughts that you had, and what did you take away, I guess, from some of those comments, and that comment in particular there, in regards to this culture? Because, Zach, this isn't a comment that's like a first-time thing. I mean, we heard Kenny Moore earlier this year. I feel like we've heard him multiple times. We've heard different players. I mean, if your veterans are saying that and your captains are saying that, I mean, what does that tell you right there?
Yeah, for starters, it's not my story. It's James Boyd and I's story. We worked together on it. And we had been on this story for a couple of months. Ever since the benching with Anthony Richardson, we kind of started to look into, like, okay, what's really going on, right? And I started talking to people around the league and inside the building. James did the same. And to answer your question, Cody, that's a really alarming quote, right? I mean, this guy that said that, there's no vision from the top down, from the front office to the coaches to the players, there's no vision. That was not a first or second year player that said that. That guy has been here for a long time. And you counter that with what Kenny Moore said after the Bills loss in November, right? The details aren't there. The preparation isn't there. The effort isn't there. Like, those are alarming things coming from veteran players. And these are not the same guy. And that's a red flag. That's a big red flag, because you don't hear that in good locker rooms. And I know these are these buzzwords we use, and the media and players use them, and coaches use them, and fans use them, right? Accountability and culture and locker room and all that stuff. But when you have players questioning the direction of the franchise, that's a big red flag. And the one person who probably needs to hear that more than any other is the boss, is Jim Irsay, because he's going to be the one who decides what happens. But when you have players believing that this team isn't going in the right direction, that's just a recipe for failure. And you want to know why this team keeps spinning its mud, like we just said, keeps, having fairly lofty expectations as we enter the season, believes it's a playoff team, says it's going to be a playoff team, and then pukes on its leg down the stretch, which it has so many times in December and January the last couple of years. Why does that keep happening? Because of that quote right there, because these players aren't fully invested in the leadership of this team. And I think it's everybody's hands are dirty. I think the owner is guilty to some degree. The GM built the roster. The coach has screwed up multiple times this year. The quarterback hasn't met the moment, hasn't met the standard, and then the players as well.
Yeah, and for a team, Zach, that obviously was so much. I mean, we heard it so much about the team run it back. The Colts doubled down on their own guys, and it's the same result. And I think that just, kind of talking about the standard, like, You heard Ryan Kelly after the whole thing with Anthony Richardson talking about the standard, and you kind of see over the last couple of years, what has that standard been? And for a lot of us,
Mediocrity.
It's
That's
been
the standard.
mediocrity. Yeah, exactly. And the unwillingness by the GM to go out and add some true difference makers. I mean, Zach, it's been 2020 since the Colts have added a all-pro type of player onto their roster that has done that. It's been that long, which is absolutely crazy. But let's go back to that accountability thing real fast, because I think there was also a pretty telling quote as well within this story about the way the Colts are trying to hold Anthony Richardson accountable, right? And to quote it, they were trying to hold him accountable, which is understandable, but the guy that they put in wasn't the guy either. So they go back to AR, and at that point, it's like, okay, what are we doing, right? And that obviously affected the team down the stretch as well. So the way the Colts handled this accountability thing, right? It's a big word we've heard from Chris Ballard for a long time, but it seems like just about every year there are certain units or certain players that aren't living up to the excellence accountability standard that every NFL team should have. If you're a championship contender, you should do that. And the Colts, it feels like about every year, there's a few units or players that aren't holding to that standard. So how do you kind of figure that out, right, when it comes to the accountability? Because it seems like it's almost this selective accountability at times where, yes, maybe Anthony Richardson needed to have that accountability, but then you look at, one of the worst statistical defenses in the NFL, and you're like, there was really no changes made. And you're paying Matt Gay what you're paying him. He can't make a 50-yard field goal. Like those sorts of things where there's sort of an accountability, but also there's not accountability. Like, what in the world do the Colts, what in the world is going on in this Colts locker room? Because it seems like it's not an isolated thing. It seems like it's been going on for a while now.
Yeah, your words selective accountability seemed apt for this situation. And remember, Cody, 2 years ago, why'd they bring in Jeff Saturday, right?
Mm-hmm.
A 1 a.m. conversation with Jim Irsay that Jeff Saturday was like, what are you talking about? Come coach the team. Well, Irsay brought in Saturday to, for lack of a better phrase, kick everybody's ass, right? To bring that accountability up, to bring the standard up to what it was when they were winning games every year, 12 games a year, making a run at a championship every year. Those days, as we ended the story, feel further and further away because of the stories that keep trickling out. I mean, you don't hear guys like Kenny Moore, who's the best cornerback on the team, one of the veteran leaders. He has a C on his chest. You don't have guys like Kenny Moore in locker rooms like Baltimore and Pittsburgh and Kansas City and Detroit coming out and saying, the effort isn't there, the preparation isn't there, the intensity isn't there. You don't have guys coming out in those locker rooms and winning cultures, even in San Francisco where they've had trouble this year because of injuries and stuff, say there's no vision. There's no vision from the top down. So when the players don't have the belief, you're not going anywhere. You have to have that buy-in because this league is too difficult. There are good players on every team. And as you know, Cody, the things you just mentioned, those little details, that's what decides games. It's a 50-yard field goal here or there. It's a couple of missed tackles. And to get back to your point, I was having flashbacks on Sunday. I'm just watching the game at home, and they're just missing tackles, and the Giants are lighting them up. And I'm going, this is Jacksonville all over again. The infamous game at the end of the 2021 season. The Colts had a 99% chance to make the playoffs, and they fell flat on their face against the worst team in football. That's exactly what happened on Sunday in the Meadowlands. And the worst part of it is that it keeps happening. And it doesn't fix itself. They outplayed the Broncos for a quarter and a half. And I'm like, okay. And then JT drops the ball on the goal line. Now that didn't decide the game, but it felt like it swung the game. And from there, they completely melted down. That's a mentally weak team. That's the opposite of the Colts in Andrew Luck's heyday and in Peyton Manning's heyday. And I think the tap out has been overblown, but it's also emblematic. And I thought McAfee's point was very spot on. It's not Richardson being a bad dude or not being a competitor. I think he's a good kid, and I think he competes and he wants to do well. But the fact that he thought that was okay says more about the locker room and the team than it does the quarterback. The kid's 22. He's going to make mistakes. I mean, Peyton Manning broke his jaw in a game, missed a play, came back and threw 3 touchdowns to get the Colts to 9-0 against Washington. Like Andrew Luck played a season with a destroyed shoulder that, made it worse. Like he tapped out because he was tired. Like, I know that's a bad look for Richardson, and you shouldn't admit that you were tired. Like, you got to lie in that situation. But
Yeah.
the reality is, McAfee made a good point. The fact that he thought that was okay and that Buckner or Zaire or Kenny Moore or Pittman wasn't going to be like, no, 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 you stay on the field. Like that's a big red flag for me. And that's where this story started for us that day in Houston when he tapped out in the divisional game. And that's kind of where they are, why they are where they are right now.
Well, the 2024 NFL season for the Indianapolis Colts is in full swing. And with that, wanted to share the sponsor of today's video, Prize Picks.
When it comes to Prize Picks, this is going to be a great way for you guys, especially, to check out some of the stuff that Prize Picks has.
You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You heard me right. Only 4 correct picks. You can win 100 times your money, guys, on Prize Picks. Be sure to sign up today and get $50 off instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed.
So if you're looking specifically for the Colts stuff, that's definitely something you guys should check out. But if you're looking for, like me, more NFL stuff, there's all sorts of stats and stuff that you can check out and make your picks. And there's definitely guys that are very consistent, like Jonathan Taylor against the Houston Texans, that you really feel like you can probably feel pretty good about overall, right? And there's some other ones where you're like, I don't know if I would take the over on that. I don't know if I would pick them to hit that margin, right? So, guys, be sure to go check out all that stuff on Prize Picks. It's only a couple examples. There's all the different odds that you could hope for when it comes to that for Prize Picks. So I encourage you guys to go check that out, but definitely excited for this season. And hopefully you guys will be following along with us and everything with Prize Picks and what they do.
So be sure to download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Like I said, guys, it's a great way to continue to stay in with week to week life of the NFL, specifically with your favorite team, the Indianapolis Colts. So be sure to do that. Be sure to check out Prize Picks. And remember, Prize Picks, run your game.
Yeah, and I think that, to your point right there, I think that's a huge telling point for this Colts culture right now, because you look at some of those guys who have the captains on their chest, the C's on their chest to be the captains. And I was kind of thinking about this, Zach. I think you had 8 captains you got this year, that have that C on their chest. And I'm like, how many of them in the key moments this year have done things like that, have tapped out, have dropped the ball at the goal line, have fumbled the ball, have missed tackles? It just feels like I don't know. It feels like just looking at the captain list here, it seems like a lot of these guys, and again, some of them are good players, but you even look at on Sunday, Kenny Moore, great player, but he had probably his worst game of the season, maybe in a couple seasons. It just is like if your captains aren't even playing at a high level, and I don't know how you feel about the whole Zaire Franklin thing, but worrying about stuff about the Pro Bowl and talking trash and it's coming back to bite you. I mean, all this stuff I think is just so emblematic, like you said, along with the tap out, for just where the current state of this Colts culture is, right? Where it just seems like it's so broken at this point. It's not an isolated thing. It's been going on for a while. I don't know. I just look at where the Colts team is right now, where the guys that you paid and you've said these are our pillars are playing right now. And it hasn't been good enough, frankly. It hasn't been good enough.
It's sad because they're good guys. And like you said, Chris Ballard is not a terrible drafter. He's drafted talented players. Now, he hasn't drafted necessarily the right positions, I don't think, that win in this league right now. But the reality is, you made a good point. I mean, for as long as I've done this, I've heard one thing over and over. Your best players have to be your hardest workers. And I always dismissed it. Chuck Pagano would say that a million times. Coaches say it all the time. Players say it all the time. But when I've talked to, the more I've gone around the league the last couple of years and talked to some of the best in the business, right? Like Brett Veach in Kansas City and Brandon Beane up in Buffalo, like they say it with conviction. The best players on your team have to be your hardest workers and your best leaders. That is not the case in Indianapolis right now, and you're seeing why. This team has talent, and if they win on Sunday, they finish 8-9, and that's not a terrible season, right? If you think that's terrible, go ask the Jets or the Browns or the Titans or the Jaguars, right? Those are dumpster fires. The Colts are not necessarily a dumpster fire. They're just stuck in this endless wheel of mediocrity because they haven't figured out the quarterback position, and they have these mental breakdowns in big moments. And I think it's reflective of the bigger issues that, Zaire's a good dude, and he's earned everything he's gotten, and he's a Pro Bowler, and that's a big deal, right? He was a 7th round pick who had to wait on the bench for years. But you can't just run your mouth and talk about spanking the Giants when you've got them in a couple weeks, because that's how this league works. And the Giants were the ones that came back and spanked the Colts on Sunday. So it's just a bad look. And you can't be in beefs with one of your most famous alums who happens to be a media superstar with Pat McAfee. Like, that's just what unserious teams do. And you can't drop the ball on the goal line when you've got a 41-yard touchdown that's going to put you up in a game that's going to decide whether you make the playoffs or not. So that's the reality of where this team is at. And we've seen snippets of it over the last couple of months. And the saddest part of all is it's the same movie, right? That you've seen, that everybody listening to this podcast has seen, that everybody watching this team has seen for the last couple of years. The only question at the end of the day that matters is, what is Jim Irsay going to do about it? And I don't have an answer to that. But I can tell you the Jim Irsay that I know is very fed up with watching the same movie year after year. This guy expects championships, and they are nowhere near that.
Yeah, 100%. And that was kind of going to be my last question. Again, I know can't probably reveal things right now and things you may be hearing, but if you're sitting, in Jim Irsay's seat right now, I mean, where do you assign the blame? I'm like, where, because obviously, like you said, everybody's hands are dirty in some way in this from the top down, but where do you start here? Black Monday is coming up on, this next week after the season. Colts have a lot of decisions. Like you said, they've been stuck in this endless cycle of mediocrity for a while. So where do you start if you're Jim Irsay?
Well, I think it's been really interesting that he's been so quiet. Jim Irsay is not a quiet man. You know this. Everybody that follows this team knows this. He's been very, very quiet of late. Now, I understand he had a very serious health situation last January. That might play into this. But again, he was out there in training camp, and he was talking about how this was the best team they fielded in years, which is just patently false. I don't know if there's going to be a Jim Irsay press conference. I do not know. I don't know what he's thinking right now, and a lot of people don't know what he's thinking right now. It will be his decision, as it always is. I don't know if they're, tied at the hip, to use a phrase from the old regime, right? Because remember, in 2015, Jim Irsay said Chuck Pagano and Ryan Grigson were tied at the hip. He gave them both extensions to match up. A year later, he fired Ryan Grigson, and I asked him, what happened to tied at the hip? And he said, I untied him. So there's no rules, there's no restrictions, there's no governor on what Jim Irsay can do. He can untie them, he can keep them together. My opinion, and this is just speculation on my part, they're going to run it back with Richardson. That's the plan as of right now. 2 years is not enough for this kid. He's 22. He's shown flashes. He needs to be more consistent. I think it would be a mistake to untie him from his offensive coordinator, right? From his play caller, from Shane Steichen. A new offensive staff is just going to create another learning curve for this kid. And he's already struggled a little bit to learn the pro game 2 years in. That's a very real thing. His completion percentage is 47 right now. That's the worst in the league. And now he's shown he can do some great things. And part of that completion percentage is drops from the receivers and the tight ends. And the line's been up and down, right? I get that. But he's not good enough right now from like 0 to 15-yard throws. Like that's just a fact. He needs to be better. I don't think pulling him away from Shane Steichen is the right move if you want to see this through. And I think you give Anthony Richardson the chance to be the guy. I don't think 2 years is enough. I think going into this in 2023, when you started him as a rookie, I think it's probably the right thing to do to give him 3 years. Now, Gus Bradley and the defense, you saw what happened in New York on Sunday. Like that was not good enough. That wouldn't surprise me if they made a move there. Now, Chris Ballard is the other part of this, right? 8 years. Jim Irsay told me a couple years ago that, Chris is still a young general manager. He's been up against it. Up against it is fair, right? They had a franchise quarterback walk out 2 weeks before the season. That was 6 years ago. Chris has been here for 8 years. He's no longer a young general manager. This is what the body of work is. And that's 2 playoff trips, 1 win, 0 division titles. And the division titles thing burns Jim Irsay. It bothers him. This is outside of maybe the NFC South, this is the most winnable division in football almost every single year. The Jaguars have hung banners. The Titans have won multiple divisions. The Texans have won it 2 years in a row. Colts haven't done anything. They haven't won an opener in 10 years. They haven't beaten the Jags on the road in 10 years. It's getting exhausting. So every move on the table is justifiable. But I think the most justifiable at this point is the general manager, who is just not getting done, who keeps saying his team is ready to compete when in fact they are not.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have to see what happens, Zach, coming up here for the Colts, but I do appreciate your time. What are some things that we can be looking for from you, from James, from The Athletic, and everything regarding the Colts?
Yeah, James will be all over the Jaguars-Colts game on Sunday and then the aftermath, right? Because the story isn't necessarily the game. It's what happens afterward. Does Jim Irsay talk in the locker room, after the locker room? He's done that in the past. I doubt it happens this week. Is there a press conference next week with Jim Irsay, with Chris Ballard? Shane Steichen will have to talk per league rules next week and put the season to bed, another disappointing season to bed. I will be covering the playoffs. So I've got a story on Dan Campbell and the Lions coming up, and then I'll be on the road next week in the house of the AFC South champions, the Houston Texans. So it'll be a busy couple of months for me, but we'll see what happens with the Colts because I will be following it very closely.
Absolutely. Well, Zach, appreciate your time, man, and hope you have a great day and a great rest of your week.
Awesome. Thanks, Cody.
Awesome. Take care.